Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I'm still not all that accustomed to coming out of this particular studio space. And it's calling it a studio space is massively hyperbolic. It's a little office that I've created that's kind of like studio with a lamp on. But nevertheless, we got to do the news. Now, I cannot hold this one for all that long because I have like 5 stories that I've been chomping at the bit to get at for the last few days, but we've been moving, so it's been hard to get at those stories. But I have several really good stories I want to talk about. This is one of them. Let's hop across the pond. Before we hop across the pond, let me check my sound to make sure everything is okay. My cousin is getting married today, and our family and everyone else is going to the wedding, so they're tearing me away from my work. Look, I love doing this, and because I love doing this, I don't think I have an addictive personality, but I definitely have a personality of I fall into things and I get enmeshed into those things for long periods of time. Whether it's, new agey stuff, whether it's talking about aliens, whether it's talking about history, whether it's talking about politics, or in this case, whether it's doing a show. I enjoy it. So it's just me. I want to talk about Brexit. And one of the interesting things that I've seen in the Brexit conversation or the debate was, the fallout of the aftermath. No one really knew what Brexit meant. People voted on stuff, but they didn't quite know what that actually entailed, what that actually meant. What was going to be the effect for Ireland after Brexit? What was going to be the effect for us, our businesses? What is going to be the effect just from the ordinary person who may not necessarily get that contract with the EU? What does it mean for the people who are living in Britain or who are British living abroad and vice versa? None of these things were answered. None of these things were fleshed out. The war for that campaign was built around this idea of this is about state sovereignty. Now, the fact is, I suspect that the same reason that people voted for Donald Trump was the same reason that you guys got Brexit. A great dissatisfaction with the radical center. And they wanted something different. They realized they were being screwed over in this process. Regular, ordinary Brits, just like regular, ordinary Americans. And they wanted to throw a brick into the establishment's window. In fact is, all of the establishment was backing Brexit, or a strong majority of it. They didn't believe it was going to take place. Surprise. Same thing with Donald Trump. Surprise. Surprise. The Eurosceptics won this. They won it. Nigel Farage, the day after that vote, he goes back to, I don't know if it's the day after, but soon after the vote, he goes back to European Parliament. And he is crowing. He is crowing. In fact, I'll find a video later. He is crowing like nobody's business. And then after glowing, because for the longest time, Nigel Farage in European Parliament kept saying, we're going to leave, we're going to leave, we're going to leave. And he's with this outspoken voice of leaving. And so finally, the public agreed. And they were going to leave. And he's there chest thumping and peacocking like nobody's business. But even Farage, at the end of that statement, had to acknowledge something. This could be bad for Britain. Regardless of all the stuff that they were saying, we could open trade deals with everywhere else, whatever. This could be bad for Britain. And what he meant by that was the European Union could punish Britain, meaning these negotiations, Britain doesn't necessarily have a leg to stand on. The only tool in Theresa May's bag of tricks was we're going to have this kind of bargain basement tax haven that's going to pull companies from the EU to do business with us. That's a horrible solution, but that's the only brick that she had at her disposal. Nigel Farage kind of make that point, you guys will hurt yourselves if you try to hurt us. Whatever. You guys didn't know what Brexit meant, and now you're dealing with the consequences of Brexit. Fair enough. I'm not living there, so I don't take a position in Brexit one way or the other. At this point, I'm more so just interested in what's taking place from the politics of it. So the Remainers lost. David Cameron gets up on Parliament, looked like he's going to cry because he's staked his political reputation on remaining in the EU. And Britain said, we're leaving. So he resigned. And he left that job to Theresa May. Theresa May said, you people who wanted to leave, that's great. You're going to now be on my cabinet to help me do this since you guys were so outspoken on it. And I've said in my other videos, I felt somewhat sorry for her for this because it's a lot that she's had to take on her plate. That being said, I don't like Theresa May. So her poll ratings plummeting in this way. Do you remember during that election when she was going against Corbyn? I think it was several months ago. She tried to have this, snap election because she thought she could break labor. Do you realize she had like a 20-point lead when that started? She is losing. If they had that election today, she would lose the prime ministership. Her tenuous thread of leadership is based on the DUP. That's an Irish party. Now, the fact is, what's taking place in regards to Brexit is absolutely important from an existential standpoint to her administration. Because the fact is, however this turns out, she could lose her prime ministership over the results of Brexit. I said before, this is political existentialism, at least from the standpoint of her reign, of her governance. One of the strategies that the Remainers have taken to is the election was illegitimate. That's the new attack. The election was illegitimate. You guys spent more money than you were supposed to be able to spend on this. Now, there are two things to this, and so let's talk about both. In fact, let's do the article first so you can see what I'm talking about. Revealed. Brexit insider claims vote leave team may have breached spending limits. Spending limits. Whistleblower alleges that electoral spending rules could have been manipulated over controversial donations. Let's stress, could have been manipulated over controversial donation, and vote leave tried to delete key evidence. They tried to hide it. Brexit whistleblower Shamir Sani. Did vote leave use me? Was I naive? The ties that bound vote leave data firm to Cambridge Analytica. Whoa, those are different. Well, let's see what the article says first. A whistleblower who worked for the official vote leave campaign has broken cover to raise concerns that the masterminds behind the 2016 vote, including key figures now working for Theresa May and Downing Street, may have flouted referendum spending rules and then attempted to destroy the evidence. The allegations from former volunteer Shamir Sani are detailed in an interview in The Observer and supported by a mass of documents and files that he has passed to the Electoral Commission and the police. Sani's central claim concerns the donation of 625 pounds, that vote leave ostensibly made to an independent referendum campaign organization called Believe. He claims the money, channeled to a digital services firm linked to the controversial Cambridge Analytica firm, violated election rules because it was not a genuine donation. Now, these things are getting into the meaning of words. What do they mean by this? What do they mean by that? And they're going to have this kind of legal fight over this. Here's the thing. There are two main points, at least that I see. There are two main points. The first one is whether or not this is true, whether or not there's a reality to this. Meaning, did they break some kind of electoral rules? Or is this just vote leave or vote stay, trying to look at this in a particular way with the language to try to create an argument, to give that impression? Meaning, is it real? Is what they're saying legitimate, or is it politics? Is this them looking at this from a lawyerly way, trying to find an argument that they can use in order for this particular thing? That's what I'm asking. Or is there a real story to this from the standpoint of these guys did overspend? The second part to this is whether the first part is true or not. It's kind of besides the point. The entire thing that they're trying to do, it's not besides the point. It's besides the point for the second issue that I'm talking about. They're trying to create a pretext to get another referendum. That's what they're trying to do. In losing the first referendum, the only way out of this is to get a second referendum. Or a soft Brexit, meaning Jeremy Corbyn is going with this idea of a soft Brexit. But the Remainers, the people who literally want to stay, people like Tony Blair, people like some of the other Blairites, their thought is you need to force a second referendum. And when they've talked about this, they've talked openly about the problems associated with Brexit, thinking that we're going to, they're going to hit a cliff or we're going to hit a rock at some point. And full on believe that we need to find a way to force another referendum. This is the pretext. This is the other attack that they've opened up in order to try to do just that. Because the fact is, even if they spent more money on the race, so what? What are you telling me about this? Are you saying that they're spending more money on the race just to tell me about it? Or are you telling me that because you actually want to do something about it? What's your remedy? What's your prescription to this? I would wager that the prescription they're going to come up with is we need a second referendum. We need a fair second referendum. You must understand this is a political war. These little tactics, these little battles, these little skirmishes. When you see people on television talking about Brexit, that's a skirmish. That's a political skirmish. That would be equivalent to some kind of military conflict. When you see a vote leave person having a conversation with a vote stay person, that is a skirmish. Using the legal system itself, or trying to force the legal system to behave in a particular way, to submit to your will, meaning the will in this case of the vote stay, this is a tactic in that toolbox. If they can establish the first point, the very next point they're going to go to is, if this election wasn't fair, this election wasn't on the up and up, if vote stay didn't have the same resources as vote leave, sounds like we need a second referendum. Mark my words, this is where they're going to go with this. So I'm not going to keep this one long, but I saw this story and I thought to myself, this is clever. I don't know if it's true or not. I would imagine there's going to be some kind of investigation. But whether it's true or not, the pretext, it's pretext. It's almost like, look, in politics, oftentimes when a political leader wants to do something, particularly when they want to do something that goes contrary to what the public wants, they need to create an issue. And the solution to that issue just so happens to be what they themselves wanted to do in the first place that the public wouldn't want to do. I'll give you an example. Republican Party is okay with less number of people voting. Dave Weigel, he was a Republican hatchet man at one point, came out and said, we don't want everybody to vote. That's an amazing statement, by the way. But we don't want everybody to vote. We find that we have a better shot at winning the election when fewer people vote. What they realized was that their voters tend to be older and they tend to have nothing else to do but go and vote. Not to mention they tend to be more rabid in getting to the polling booth. So from his standpoint, if you're putting in legislation that makes it harder for some people to vote, so what? Our voters are going to get there. Our voters are more tenacious. They're going to get to the polls. And what he finds is that he's usually right. When you have a suppressed vote, Republicans have a better chance at winning. This election with Trump was a suppressed vote to some degree. I mean, and what I mean by that is you had people demoralized by this particular election. You had some people who would go in and vote for everybody else down the ballot, but leave the presidential part blank. Do you want cyanide or do you want cancer? Take your choice. It's a democracy. You have choice. You have a choice. So what do you do for that? You can't just come out and say, I want to suppress the vote. That would never fly. You can't say that. What you can say is, we have voter integrity issues. And we have a lot of illegals and dead people voting at our precincts. Certainly, dead people shouldn't be able to vote. And certainly, illegals shouldn't be able to vote. So we need to have a card. We need to have some identification that we can identify who the person is. Now, there is no election fraud, at the very least not from what they're talking about. They're talking about people going in and voting for somebody else and then voting like 2 or 3 times. That doesn't really exist. There's like a 1%, and I don't even think it was that much. What was taking place, though, was doing that, putting those policies disadvantage one particular group, meaning there were certain groups that were more disadvantaged by others. If you were black, you wouldn't necessarily have the ID. If you're Hispanic, oftentimes they wouldn't have the ID. In fact is, the majority of the population being white and the majority of the population having those things, look at it and say, if I have this, everyone else should have this. I don't see this as being an issue. So if they're going to put voter IDs on the ballot, I think that's perfectly okay. It seems perfectly innocuous, but it's not innocuous. You had hundreds of thousands of people who didn't have those identifications who weren't able to vote because of it. Yes, voter fraud is not an issue. Election fraud, yes. Voter fraud, in the way they're saying, is not an issue. They could not come out and say that this is what we wanted to do. However, the solution to the issue, meaning IDs in some cases, solved their issue. It was able to suppress the vote sufficiently. When Democrats needed to do something similar in the election, they did the same thing. They would cut down on the number of polling locations. This forced people into longer lines, at which point people would say, oh, fuck it, I'm going to leave. I don't want to stay in this line. Hillary Clinton supporters, again, many of which were older, would send in mail-in ballots and everything else, meaning they knew that their voting demographic was already going to get their votes in. So if those people had to wait in longer lines, those people were, a lot of them, Sanders supporters. So yeah, we're going to close polling locations. We're going to make those people stand in lines for hours and hours and hours and hours, and eventually we'll bleed away some of them. They wanted to suppress the vote because they understood that they had an advantage with the suppressed vote. You have a problem, come up with a problem, and make sure that the solution to that problem is the thing that you yourself wanted to do and to get accomplished. So, But that's all I mean by this. The reason that this is coming up, whether it's true or not, is kind of besides the point, at least from the standpoint of what they're using this for. This is just used as a path to have another referendum. I have to be honest, I didn't necessarily get the full gravity of Brexit at the time of Brexit. It was when I was watching this lecture of subscribers sent me a lecture from the gentleman who was Irish, and I can't think of his name, but he was talking just frank and honest, and he was giving the interconnectedness between Britain and Ireland, and Britain and the rest of the EU, and making this argument of it is impossible for those ties to be made up in other places. And if it comes down to one of those things where we're putting friction between these things, you are going to hurt us, and you're going to hurt yourselves. Ireland was never thought about when people were talking about Brexit. And now it's one of the major issues associated with it. And I thought to myself, this guy is absolutely right. And let me just say it this way. I was concerned. So I'm going to leave this here. Let's see if anybody's here. This one has to be short. They're not worth a dime between Democrats and Republicans, I like that. Rich get average, poor become average. Stoner Corso. We don't have a democracy or even a federal constitutional republic. We have a plutocracy. Yes, agreed. We don't have freedoms. We have privileges that can be, and often are, taken away or restricted. And that is also true. That is also true. Freedom is something different. What people scream about, talking about freedom and all this other stuff, oftentimes that's not freedom. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like if you're free to die on the street without health care, is that a freedom that you actually want? What about free to be stuck working 50 hours a week in a job that you absolutely hate, making bare minimum wage? Is that a freedom that you want? I mean, what people are talking about, it's like people are working 50, 60 hours a day or hours a week in a job that they hate. And yet they would still pledge allegiance to the flag, say that this is to some degree freedom, and continue on the hamster wheel, absolutely vulnerable. That's not freedom. That's not freedom. That's something else. That is something else. Beatrice Pierre. Hi, Jamal. What's happening, Beatrice? What's happening? Attention, those nearing retirement age, Social Security does not even cover the cost of your rent. Jamal, agreed. That's another point. When they're talking about Social Security and they're talking about cutting Social Security, do you understand Social Security? It doesn't even cover rent. It doesn't even cover rent. Like they take money out of your Social Security check for healthcare. They take, and look, I know this because I was on dialysis. You know, when I was 17 years old, started with kidney failure, and having to deal with the federal government is a pain in the ass. Don't get me wrong. It is life-saving when you're talking about the assistance you get, either Medicaid, Medicare, you know, your healthcare. But it confines you to a life of poverty if you stay that way. Social Security doesn't even pay your rent. Doesn't even pay your rent. We can do more for the people who spend a lifetime toiling away in some kind of plantation. Yes, they chose the plantation, but it's a plantation nonetheless. We can do better for those people. So, all right, guys, I'm going to leave that here. I have one more that I want to do before we leave. So that one is probably also going to be rather quick. All right, guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.